This is Distant Replay, the podcast that goes back in time to relive all the greatest events that we witnessed in sports. From upsets, to championships, to cultural moments, we discuss it all. Coming up on today's episode.
Yeah, I got offered a plea bargain days before my trial. 10 years probation, lifetime sex offender registration, a certain amount of fine, a certain amount of time in jail. I said no. They came back with 5 years probation, lifetime sex registration. And my mom was breaking. My mom said, Mijo, think about it.
Well, we're changing gears a little bit, going back to the documentary side of things. We're talking about Outcry, a documentary on Showtime. If you haven't seen it yet, highly recommend it. We're going episode by episode, starting with this one, episode 1. And we picked out Outcry because it does deal with a bit of a sports angle with Greg Kelley, the main person involved, who ended up in prison. He is a football player that was committed to TSA in high school and then ended up, of course, going through this entire trial, ended up in prison. So we're going to go through this whole documentary, and we were put onto it by a friend, and it makes a lot of sense that we go through this because it's a great documentary so far, at least. We're going to go episode by episode, by the way, and just to preface this by saying we're going to be watching them not all at once. So we're not going to start the show knowing how it ends. We're going to kind of go through it as you watch it so that, we're going to share our thoughts, our questions, our, confusions as we go through. And we have quite a few. We're starting here with episode 1. So welcome in. I'm Ben George. He's Mike Noto. Mike, we're off to a good start with this first episode 1, but I guess it's important to note that every episode is available right now.
All the episodes are available for streaming like right now. So that's why we wanted to make the special point to let you guys know we're watching it sort of episode by episode just to have genuine reactions here during the podcast.
Yeah, no question. So it's going to be a lot of fun, I think. And because, look, it's a very intriguing story, and there's a lot of questions, a lot of holes. It seems like you have the tale of the prosecutors and the police, how above board were they with everything. They have kind of a history there. And then you have this other side where it's just a horrible, horrible accusation and offense. So, you got to balance that idea of who to believe and who to trust, because you don't want to, stand up for a pedophile on one side, but you also want to make sure the right person ends up behind bars. So it's a lot to talk about, and we're going to dive into episode 1. Before we get started, though, let me remind you again, you can find us online, distantreplaypodcast.com. You can find us on Twitter, Distant Podcast. You can find us on YouTube and also Instagram as well. So any of those platforms, we'd love to hear from you if you have thoughts on this show, this documentary, or if you have any games that you want us to watch. We'll get back to games after we finish this documentary. So, Mike, let's jump in. Episode 1, again, on Showtime. So we'll get introduced to everything right out of the bat, right? So we meet Greg Kelley. We get introduced to who he is as a football player, Leander High School. As you can imagine, we're right in the heart of Texas, just north of Austin, Texas. So football is king. Everybody that knows anything about high school football knows Texas is, they take it to another level in terms of how serious they are about it, how passionate they are about it. And this is a kid that, starting from when he was young, was very good. And you could tell that he had the skills to play at the next level. And that's what we learned about early on from Greg. So first thoughts is, this seems like a kid that probably much like a lot of other kids around this Texas area has a great future, bright future, very well liked, very popular. There's a lot to like about the kid.
Yeah, we're talking like Ben just mentioned, we're talking Leander, Texas, just north in Williamson County. That was a special delineation that was made early on in this documentary. Is there's a big difference between the county that Austin is in and Williamson County. Williamson County, a lot more of a conservative county in Texas. It was crazy. It's still crazy for me being from an area where high school football isn't exactly that big. 12,000 seat stadium and a 60-yard press box for high school football. That's just crazy to hear. I know you're more used to the big college football down near where you're from, Ben, but that still strikes me every time I hear something like that. He played at the highest level of Texas high school football, the 5A. And look, from a football player standpoint, I mean, his highlight reel that they showed in the beginning part of the documentary was pretty impressive. He looked like a legit prospect and a legit player.
Yeah, he did. He seemed like a kind of guy that if, he had a really good senior year. Now he did commit early before senior year, but it seemed like if he had a really good senior year, could have gotten a few higher offers potentially, but still playing Division I football was in the plans. And you mentioned Williamson County. That was the county they lived in, and we kind of set the table for that as well as they introduced us to it's a conservative county. Police are very strict. If you're doing something wrong, you don't want to be doing it in Williamson County. They had this perception and this reputation that they had kind of built through the years. That kind of tells you where we're heading in terms of how the police handle things and how strict they are with anything that comes their way. So we hear that. And then also another thing I think is interesting, and I want to see how this plays into it later on, Mike, but they really made a point to point out, look, in football and on Friday nights, it's Leander, then you got Cedar Park, right? Those are the two big schools, two big rivals. You see Cedar Park on the water tower right across the street, essentially from the high school. I just wonder how much the Cedar Park aspect of this plays into the story as we move along. Did you think about that at all?
Yeah, I think this beginning part sort of planted a lot of seeds, right?
Right.
Like they mentioned the water tower and how it's right near Cedar Park, but they don't really give much context to it. They mentioned the whole show starts with the young boy who we'll get to in a second, who accused Greg Kelley of sexual misconduct. It starts with him and his Outcry. That's where they get the name of the documentary from.
Right.
Where it's the first time the boy sort of voices what happened to him and who did it to him. So we get a little bit of information about that, but not the whole picture. And we get introduced to a lot of the main players in the first part of the documentary here too.
Yeah.
You want to go through those main players here real quick?
Yeah, let's go through them. Go ahead and run through them.
All right, so we have Sean Mannix, who's the chief of police in Cedar Park. We have Lindsay Armstrong, who's a student in Leander. They didn't specify, but it sounded like in Leander.
It seemed like she lived she was in the neighborhood, essentially. I assume she went to school. Yeah, I mean, I assume she did. I mean, she knew all about Gabry, as you're about to talk about, but she knew all the players in this involved. So I assume she went to school there.
Yeah, then we're introduced to Gabry Anderson and her parents, who Gabry is Greg's girlfriend. And we're introduced to the McCarty family as well, who will play a huge role in this. The McCarty family, most notably the mother, Shama. Shama McCarty's son, Jonathan, was very good friends with Greg Kelley and took Greg Kelley in right before his senior year of high school, his to-be senior year of high school, because Greg's father was in the hospital with a very bad stroke. We don't even see him in this documentary in this episode. And his mother at the time was recovering from a brain tumor. So she was in the hospital as well. And the McCarty family took Greg in. And again, the connection there was Greg was good friends with the McCarty son, Jonathan.
Yeah, we also have the sports anchor who kind of put a perspective on this from both sides as well. But those are the main players we see early on. And you mentioned the McCarty. So yeah, I thought it was interesting, and it just seemed a little odd when he's dealing with a lot, and with everything going on in his family, in order to stay at school at Leander and finish out his career there with his friends, his girlfriend, same school he's played football at for his whole career. He needed to stay in the district, and that's why Shama said, "Hey, I'll take him in. I'll take care of him. I'll take him to school. I'll feed him. I'll do whatever he needs in order to let him finish out school." Now, it seems like a great offer, right? She says, Greg Kelley's mom says, it's how she wanted to get her blessings. Just to me, it seemed odd how much she wanted to do. And look, maybe she is a very giving person, Mike. Maybe she is very selfless, but it just seemed a little weird to me with kind of how it was presented by Greg's mom. So I don't know if you got the same kind of feeling overall, or you thought, hey, this is fine, this is normal, but it just seemed odd to me when it happened.
Now, remember, we had the benefit of watching this entire episode, so we don't know what's really coming here, right? But when I did get a kind of little bit of strange vibe from the lady Shama. I mean, maybe because, maybe because we're not used to people being this nice, maybe. I don't know what it is, but I got the same vibe from her. She was trying to go kind of over the top to bring Greg in and care for him. We find out that Lady Shama here, right towards the end of the introduction, runs a daycare out of her home in Cedar Park. So just so we're clear, Leander's where Greg goes to school, and Cedar Park is where Shama lives.
You mentioned Jonathan McCarty, the close friends with Greg, also with Gabriel. He also lives there as well. They play football together, a year different, so they're in the house as well. So we get the first notice of the accusation, right? So this is after Greg's already committed to UTSA. He's focused on school. He says he's focused on working out, focused on football. He just wants to make a better life for himself. He gets called on July 15th, 2013. His brother calls him, says, "Hey, are you home yet?" No. Okay. Well, you don't want to go there. This is what is happening right now. This is the accusation that's happening. And, it obviously shakes his life up right off the bat. I don't know what it would be like getting that call. He kind of talks about it. Listen, what do you say when the accusations are that serious, right? I mean, a 4-year-old boy, you're accused of sexual assault. There's not much you can say in that situation, especially if as he says, he's innocent. So you kind of get that first taste of that. So we got to get our idea of where this is headed now, what the actual story is. And it seemed, again, I didn't know anything about this story going into it. So when the accusations came down, I was like, man, that's pretty serious stuff. And I didn't remember hearing about this when it happened at all. I don't know if you had this story on your radar at all, Mike. I don't know how national this story became, but pretty serious stuff right out of the gates. Yeah,
besides to give our listeners a frame of reference, besides sports, what I watch the most is true crime documentaries. And I'll have to say, unfortunately, it's a topic with a lot of things to delve into. And I had never heard of this case before watching this documentary, so I had no prior knowledge of it. And like you mentioned, the accusations of the child towards Greg, he specifically mentions Greg in his interviews, were very graphic. As you go back and watch the documentary, watch it along with us, you'll see what we're talking about. They're very direct towards Greg, and they're very specific about what was done to him. Now, we should mention, the boy is 4 years old.
Right.
A very young 4 years old. When Greg hears the allegations, he denies them, right away, very vehemently. And then his mother, and Shama go to Greg's girlfriend's parents for kind of guidance.
Yeah, Gabriel's dad.
Yeah, Gabriel's dad. It was unclear. Is Gabriel's dad a lawyer, or was just someone that Greg trusted?
Or was
I don't know why. It
or
didn't
was
really
he a
explain
coach?
Why they went to him.
Or was he a coach? Because I know at one point, he's telling the story. He said, Greg came in, "Hey, coach, I didn't do this." So I wasn't clear on that either.
Someone he probably just trusted.
Yeah. So
probably more likely. Okay.
Yeah. So the accusations come down, and he's looking for feedback or whatever. But he ends up hiring a lawyer based on the recommendation of Shama, which again is I don't know. She seems like she's in control of a lot of stuff that's happening right now. And not that there's anything wrong with the lawyer necessarily. We don't know anything about her yet, but it just seems odd that she's the one that makes the decision. She's the one that points him in this direction, and he goes that route. And so right after he hires a lawyer, a second accusation comes down, and this is when it starts getting a little more serious. So you have another boy that comes in and says the same type of thing happened to me. Now you got 2 kids accusing him, and now it becomes a lot more serious to people. And people believe, hey, this might actually have a little more truth to it than we first thought, because, look, we don't think Greg's this type of guy, but you have two boys saying the same thing. And then both accusations, again, come out of the daycare, right? So they come out of Shama's house. So at this point, I'm just like, I don't know, Mike, and we'll get into the trial here in a second, so maybe I should just save it a little bit. But having both these things come out of the same house, I don't know why early on there wasn't as much pressure on Shama and more questions as to, what's going on in the daycare right now? How is this happening? Maybe it's just the way the documentary presented it, but it just seemed like there should have been a lot more light shine on what was happening at the daycare. And hey, who's watching this? How is this happening under your watch? What else is going on inside of those walls?
I completely agree with that. And it seemed like you said, Shama tried to control the situation right from the get-go. Goes to, Greg's mother, who just seems like a good person, not used to being in trouble with the law or having anything to do with the law. She's completely blindsided and says, I don't know what to do. I've never been involved in something like this. And right away, Shama makes the recommendation for the attorney. And as of now, look, there's no reason to think Shama is up to anything, right? There is no real reason to think. They trust her enough to leave Greg with them for a period of time. But I do agree, again, we know nothing about the lawyer at this point. The second accusation gave a lot of people a reason for pause, because remember, in the preface to this second accusation, we're hearing how great of a kid Greg is, how committed he is, how mature he is. I think the way he was sort of brought up, he had to mature maybe a little bit earlier than most high school kids. And then boom, you hit him with the first accusation, which you already knew about. And then the second one comes, and you have people even close to him, even some of his one of his coaches, sort of saying like, "Hey, what's going on here now?" One kid is one thing, but now another one. And then that's when the focus really is on Greg. And we now get to the point where, the district attorney is going to file formal charges against him.
Yep, those charges, by the way, super aggravated sexual assault. So this is like, I think, a newer charge or newer crime that they had put in designation. But, if it happens to a child under the age of 6 is how you can get this designation. But the reason why it's so serious is because of the penalty. You have a sentence of 25 years minimum with no parole, maximum of 99 years with no parole. And as Greg points out, and I don't know, if this is exactly fact or not, I don't know the law in Texas, but it is the only case that carries no opportunity for parole, I guess, which is a huge deal in this whole case. This is kind of what changes the game, because now you're staring down the opportunity. You have to get this right, or you're off for at least 25 years minimum, no questions asked. So that's why this is such a big deal, this charge. And we get introduced here, Mike, to these district attorneys in Williamson County. This is the other part of this whole first episode. Williamson County has this history now, right? So go back, before Jana Duty, who's there now as a DA, and the assistant DAs, Jeffrey Puryear and Sunday Austin. Before them, you had guys that had some questionable handling of cases, and because of that, you had a guy that had been convicted of murdering his wife, was in prison for 25 years or so, Michael Morton, and John Bradley, the DA beforehand. I'm sure this is the kind of stuff that you love, and you probably got fired up at John Bradley. But this guy doesn't present evidence, DNA evidence, that could have overturned the case or kind of would have benefited Michael Morton for whatever reason, right? He had some stupid answers that he presented, and you had to think there's no way this DA is that stupid or that arrogant or that, I guess, corrupt is even what it felt like at times. But you have that into Jana Duty, and that's why this whole case is such a big deal, because you also have this happened in 2013 when Michael Morton was let off. They found the guy that actually committed this murder, and now you have this case coming in behind it. There's a lot of this talk, and that's why Jana Duty was elected into that position after John Bradley to hopefully try to clean things up.
Yeah, you got to remember where we are in the timeline here is we're still in like mid-July of 2013 when the charges are brought against Greg, right? And like you mentioned, again, true crime Mike sort of popping his head out here. But one thing I've learned over the years from watching these documentaries is if you have evidence as a prosecutor, you have to turn it over to the defense, right? Sort of like look at it like everyone's got to be on the same page and have the same information.
Right.
So that was not done in this case of this Michael Morton, like you mentioned. This guy sat in jail for 25 years, being convicted of killing his wife. The DNA evidence exonerates him. And now Jana Duty runs on a platform of honesty, transparency, and all of these sort of wholesome, conservative values and what we want to think our district attorneys are doing all the time, right? That they're acting in the best interest of the public. They're acting within the confines of the law. She sort of plays up this whole, Michael Morton exoneration and sort of rides it to a victory in the election. So I know, remember down in a place like Williamson County, and I think it's popular a lot of places, is the district attorney is an elected office. So you're basically running for office. So now you have Jana Duty becomes the DA, and her assistants are, like you mentioned, Joffrey Puryear and Sunday Austin, and they all play very integral roles here in the trial for Greg Kelley.
As we get into the trial, before it starts, they offer him a plea deal, okay? They say 10 years probation, you register as a sex offender for life. You want to do that? Greg says no. They change it. Okay, how about 5 years probation? But again, you still have to register as a sex offender for the rest of your life. So his mom, on one hand, was saying, listen, strongly consider this because you're not going to jail. I don't have to worry about if you go in, what's going to happen to you when you go in, because you have a crime where you're accused and convicted of sexually assaulting a child. Bad things usually come to you in prison. That is one of the things that, these guys really have very little leniency for in prison. So I could see where his mom was coming from. But on the other side of that, you had like his girlfriend tell him, listen, you can't do that. You're not guilty. The truth will come out. You don't want to say you're a sex offender the rest of your life because you felt the pressure of not giving in to the district attorney over these charges. And I don't know what I would pick, Mike. I mean, honestly, like that, I don't know that there's a tougher decision at 19 years old than decide, hey, I don't want to be in jail. But I'll have to be a sex offender my entire life versus if this case goes the wrong way, I'm in prison till at least I'm 44. At least,
What a decision. I mean, like you said, it's.
I mean, guilty or not. I mean, even if you're not guilty, even if you think there's plenty of evidence that could come out, just knowing that how our justice system works, it's not always 100%. Knowing that you could be in there for that long simply because your lawyer dropped the ball or the DA hit a little bit of evidence, whatever it is.
Yeah. What about the girlfriend sticking by him? Remember, before the trial starts, we're a year later.
Yeah.
We're in July of 2014 now, and the girlfriend's standing by him. That's not something you always see in situations like this, especially with cases with these kind of accusations. And then we get into his trial, right? He does not take the plea deal. He decides not to take it and go to trial. They didn't really give, I don't know if we're going to get more information on the trial in episode 2, but they didn't really cover the trial that much. The main parts of the trial they covered was a video of the second accuser now saying Greg did not touch him and did not do anything to him. So the second accuser recanting what he had told in his interview with the counselor. And we get introduced also to the gym owner, who I know you want to say a few words on, Ben.
Yes. I mean, I think they're just kind of introducing the trial itself. I'm assuming we'll get much more into the trial as we move along here, at least a little bit a deeper look at how this all played out. But yes, they, as they're trying to make their case against Greg, and it seems like when that second boy recanted his accusation, it seems to really favor Greg. I mean, listen, it's one kid that said it didn't happen. So now you're just down to one child whose story that you're trying to make sense of and figure out exactly how it played out, who was involved, whatever. So they bring the gym owner in, a place where Greg had worked out before. They had, I guess, had spent some time, basically just gym talk. Hey, how's it going? School, blah, 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 whatever. Nothing deep. They, didn't really have a relationship. And they brought him in, prosecutors, to really look at the character of Greg Kelley. And the gym owner tells a story that, listen, when we were in there, this guy told me about his military service because the gym owner was in the military as well. That's why I connected with it. The gym owner says, this guy, look, he told me he was a Marine, talked about his service, and we really connected. I respected anybody else in the service as well. And then he finds out he's just a football player. So he comes in to tell this story and say, this guy's a liar. He can't be trusted. So I don't really know. I'm trying to figure out why this guy was found, right? It's wild that he would just make up the story out of the blue. I mean, what does he have to gain by getting involved in this at all? I mean, even if you were involved in this, wouldn't you just say, Mike, like, this kid, he told me some things before. I don't really know him at all. Like, I'm not going to get involved in this, but maybe he's a liar, maybe he's not. But this guy, look, I'm getting out of this trial. Why am I going to get involved with a trial, a super sexual aggravated assault? But to me, it's just like, what does this have to do with anything? I mean, I guess, yeah, sure, maybe he lied at some point. Everybody in high school is lying about something, any given day. But why does this gym owner have this credibility that he can come in here and really determine the outcome of the case?
Yeah, because like you mentioned, everything's sort of swaying towards the defense at this point when that second kid recants. And they make it sound like this gym owner coming in and calling Greg a liar, lying about his military service is a big turning point in the case. I'm not making the connection. Look, we don't know to be honest, we don't know if Greg did lie about his military service or lack thereof. And we don't know if Greg did this as of now, right? I mean, we don't really know at this point, but it's a big jump. Let's say he did lie about his military service. It's a big jump from lying about military service to being a sexual predator, Like, I'm not making the connection on, even if he did lie about it, how that strengthens the case of the accusations against him here. But they made it sound like a very big turning point in the case. And I don't see, this is one of those rare cases, I don't see the benefit in either of them lying about the incident because it's so non-consequential,
Yeah. What does the gym owner have to gain? Like the only way he's involved in this is he had a guy working out at his gym. That's it. Like, there was no relationship. These guys weren't close. And they did point out that, as part of his, I guess, ROTC program or whatever it was, Greg he'd have a uniform. He'd wear fatigues. That's just part of what he had to wear for school. So maybe he came into the gym and was wearing that, and maybe he got the idea that maybe he was in the military, or maybe he just mixed him up with somebody else. I mean, I would assume this gym's got hundreds of people coming through any given day, and this guy might look like, he looks like a pretty typical teenager, young 20s, white. He looks like a white male. His mother's obviously got a little different background, but you know what I'm saying? Like, he looks like a lot of guys, probably that age. So it could easily have gotten mixed up. But I thought the other thing that was interesting that he said during the trial was when they went back and forth, and he's talking after the trial to the documentary, and he says, if Greg tries to call me a liar, then to me, he loses all credibility because no, I don't lie. And I was sitting there thinking, how is he going to lose credibility now? Didn't you already say that he's lost credibility because of what he said in terms of his military service? To me, it kind of contradicted his whole angle. Like, why are you saying now that this guy is going to ruin his reputation to you? Hasn't he already done that? Like, that didn't add up to me at all when he said that. So again, this guy has a big part of it. I don't really get it, but I'm sure we're going to find out more about this gym owner. I would imagine at some point. His connection to Greg, or the story, has to be deeper than just this accusation of lying. We hear from a juror as well, and they basically say, look, it started off as a 6-6 vote after the trial. It kind of slowly changed as they listened to more testimony. Eventually, it was 11-1 when they came in and said, listen, you got to make a unanimous decision or you're going to a hotel. So it seemed like there's a little bit of pressure put on them, like, hey, make this decision or you're going to be sitting around here for a while without your family. And they came back with a unanimous vote, guilty charge, and he's heading off to prison. So after this, really quickly, Mike, we get introduced to Jake Bryden, who saw the trial, wanted to help out Greg Kelley, doesn't know Greg, but there's this huge divide, as they pointed out. You're either on the Greg Kelley side or you're on the side of the accuser, the children's side, and there's no in between. Like, you have an opinion either way. Jake Bryden led this movement to protect Greg, fight for Greg, and that's kind of where we leave off. Is he's fighting, and there's more to come with this case. So, anything from the trial you want to quickly touch on before I've got a few questions about where we're headed?
Yeah, so that situation in the jury room infuriates me. How could you go from 6-6?
Right.
You just listened to, let's say, 2 or 3 weeks. I don't know how exactly long the trial was. Let's say it was 2 or 3 weeks. You just went from listening to 2 or 3 weeks of testimony and came to the conclusion that 6 people did that he was not guilty. How do then 6 people change their opinion within one day, unless the answer is they're just being selfish and wanted to go home? You can't tell me that 6 people in one day changed their mind after 2 or 3 weeks of listening to testimony. That kind of stuff infuriates me because we're playing with the kid's life here.
I know.
He's given 5 minutes to decide whether he wants to take the minimum of 25 years with no parole. But if he takes that, he waives his right to appeal. He's literally given 5 minutes to make this decision.
I know.
Right before his sentencing hearing. And to me, I think hopefully we'll hear in future episodes how his attorney completely dropped the ball on that fact. Could you imagine having to make that decision? And then you get into look, it's either one thing or the other, right? You're either for Greg or you're against Greg. And the for Greg movement is led by this Jake Bryden, who completely comes out of nowhere in support of Greg after he hears about his story on the news. So what questions do you have for me, buddy?
Well, this is just some questions I have about the documentary and where we're headed. So, number one, where's Shama? I'm assuming she's died at this point. I would assume that I don't think we're going to get introduced to her if we haven't been already, right?
Yeah, they mentioned she was in the courtroom crying afterwards, but there's got to be something else going on with her.
Well, if we haven't heard from her at this point,
yeah.
We're probably not going to, right?
Oh, we're not going to hear from her directly. Yeah. I agree with that. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yes,
so what's her story? Where has she gone since this time? Why is there not much talk about how much time Greg spent around the kids in the house? Like, we have this accusation, and to me, it just seems like I know we're going to learn a lot more about the case, but I just don't know how they make the connection from this boy saying Greg, okay, to it being Greg Kelley. There seems like there's not a ton being investigated here. Like, I just can't. I'm trying to figure out why he's just so guilty when all we know is this one child had something happen to him, said the name Greg, right? We don't know if it's actually his name's Greg or if it's a different Greg or this Greg's involved at all. But why is there not any talk about hey, he was around the children a lot. He oftentimes he stayed around and did homework at the house when Shama was out, donating her time to the local organization. Or he wasn't ever around. He was always at the gym. He'd come home late at night. Because to me, it sounds like if you're running a daycare, doesn't the daycare typically end at like 3 or 4? I don't know how they work in a home daycare. I'm just thinking about my own experiences. 5 o'clock, right? It just seems like the time frame. Greg would rarely be there the same time the kids were because of school. So why isn't there any conversation about how frequently he's around the children in the house?
Yeah, the biggest that you bring up very good points there, first of all. But my thing is the trial really that short and sweet and without any information on the investigation, or do we just not have all the information yet? I mean, they didn't go to any part of any investigation. They didn't go into, like you said, any details of like the timeline of what happened, what exactly happened, where it happened. We didn't get any of that information. We just got the second kid recanted. The gym owner said he's a liar, and now he's going to jail for 25 years.
Yeah.
The second, I'm expecting the second episode to be a lot more about drill down the specifics of what exactly are the accusations against him, and a little more into what was discussed in the trial. They have to go there at this point.
Yeah, a lot of info left out for sure. And to me, this first episode finishing up, it seems like it's leaning very heavily in Greg's favor. I just assume this documentary is going to exonerate Greg Kelley, at least after one episode. So there has to be a lot more coming to stay intrigued with this, because it reminds me too of Making a Murderer. I'm sure you saw that on Netflix, one of the first big true crime documentaries to come out about something like this, an old case. But it reminds me of that in the sense that there you have this group of people like the police officers that are just so hell-bent on him being guilty, right? When all the evidence and everything that we're hearing presented tells us there should be a lot of questions raised. So there has to be a part of this that fills in a lot of that gap to tell us why there's so much conviction on the guilty side, why they feel so strongly about Greg being in this position. Because otherwise, you look at this as an outsider and you're thinking, none of this really adds up. Yeah, he could definitely be guilty, but there's very, very, very little evidence that's pointing to that at this point.
And you mentioned the holes in the prosecution's case from what we know right now. But remember, this kid just took a deal of 25 years, the minimum for what he was accused of, and he waived his right to appeal.
Yep.
So I don't know how that's going to play into things. That if we are on a road to exoneration here, is it going to be a lot more drawn out because he waived his right to appeal?
Yeah. The other question I have about the documentary is how the role that Lindsay Armstrong plays, and you mentioned her as one of the residents. She goes to high school or went to high school with them. She was a survivor of sexual assault, but she obviously stands firm on the side of the children, believe the children, and Greg Kelley is guilty, which is fine. And I don't question her motives there. I just wonder how she fits in. Are you just grabbing a random person that had survived sexual assault and just letting them defend that side of it? Or does she know more about Greg? Does she know more about this case than we know right now?
Yeah, it was very unclear whether she has a personal connection to the case or just in general, is someone who's, an advocate for the victims, which is very important in these cases. We're not, and I'm not, we're not underscoring that at all. But again, her exact role is a little bit unclear. And I'm assuming we haven't heard the last from her either, or the chief of police.
Yeah, so a lot of questions. I'm curious to see where this goes, but I definitely left off episode 1, ready to go to episode 2, because, it's a very interesting case. And I feel like we're going to have a lot more coming out, especially about Greg and the details of everything that happened here. So any final thoughts, Mike?
No, other than I'm really looking forward to episode 2. It's very challenging watching these things one at a time because I'm used to watching them all at once in one night. So I'm really want to get to episode 2 and be sure to follow along with us on this little journey.
Yeah, this is definitely one of those documentaries or one of those series that you could binge very, very quickly. Just fire up the next one. They leave a good cliffhanger at the end, but we're going to do it episode by episode. So episode 2 coming out next. We'll have that recap. We'll go along with all 5 episodes of Outcry, the documentary on Showtime. So hit subscribe on Distant Replay Podcast. Find us online, distantreplaypodcast.com, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter. We're all on all those platforms. We'd love to hear your feedback as well. So for Mike Noto, I am Ben George. Thanks for listening to this episode of Distant Replay Podcast. We'll We'll talk to you next time.